Hello and welcome to the New Rules for Negotiating 10-Minute Learning Series, a short but comprehensive series of contract negotiation webinars specifically designed for people who negotiate complex customer-supplier agreements. This year's lessons are based on the training manual, the Contract Professional's Playbook. This lesson's topic is developing a plan to monitor post-award obligations. We will briefly examine ways to determine the extent and level of regular monitoring of customer supplier performance to achieve business objectives and to control risk. For those of you who don't know, I am Nyden. I am the author and co-author of 3 books, including Getting to We, The Vested Outsourcing Manual, and Negotiation Rules. I work with contract professionals to teach performance and outcome-based contracting best practices. The content from today's learning lesson is from the Contract Professional's Playbook and the associated e-learning program. This is a 12-week program that I offer. It includes 4 parts, 12 targeted training videos and webinars, much more in depth than what you're getting today, 25 plus tools, 12 live weekly Q&A sessions with me, and a comprehensive manual. The Playbook e-learning program covers 12 how do I questions. Today, we're covering content from week 10. How do I effectively monitor, manage, and govern a complex relationship? Your key to success is to determine the extent of your role or a colleague's role and level of administration, monitoring, and relationship management for the relationship type and the contract that you or your colleague manage. In other words, the relationship type is it performance-based? Is it outcome-based? Is it value-based? Does it have incentives? Does it have service credits? So you have to determine the relationship type, and then you have to look at the contract itself, and then you develop the role of monitoring that either you or a colleague must perform to get a critical level of performance. This is true for the customer and for the supplier. This is the contract life cycle to the left as you look at the screen. Once the contract is signed by representatives from both the customer and the supplier, and ideally not before, but we don't live in an ideal world, the contract professional role shifts from developing the requirements to helping to ensure that those requirements are met by both parties. Now, some companies, that's the same person for the contract professional. In other companies, it's a different person. If it is a different person at your organization, please forward this to them so that they can get the learning. Obligation management has 4 factors. 1, both parties have a common and consistent view of contract obligations. I was just talking this morning with one of my clients, and they literally have to come back to a meeting and rediscuss contract obligations because they're using different words to mean different things and they're not on the same page. And even with a word like governance, it means something at the very large customer, it means something very different at the supplier, mid-market, and they're not seeing eye to eye. So that's an absolute obligation. Both parties have to have a common and consistent view. Both parties have to have a common and consistent understanding of the performance measures. Key performance indicators, service level agreements, service level obligations, they come under many names. Both parties share important information about contract obligations with each other. That means that suppliers remind the customer of their obligations, provide drawings, provide certificates, provide permits, etc. And then likewise, the customer also reminds the supplier of their obligations. And then finally, both parties informally review problems and formally resolve problems as necessary. I mean formally as in through an escalation process, not a third party requiring the legal department. The level of contract management Now, while the 4 characteristics ensure success, the duties of contract management is not a one-size-fits-all. The nature of the goods and services delivered to the customer will determine the extent of the contract manager's role, level of administration, monitoring, and relationship management. So let's look at what that could mean. In order to develop that role of administration, monitoring, and relationship management, I prefer to use a checklist. And this is from the Contract Professionals Playbook, is the checklist on the right. There are 6 sections to the contract management checklist. There's monitoring performance, accepting goods and services, performance measures, compliance, invoicing and payment, and then personnel roles. So you have to start looking at these. Maybe you have other areas in your organization to start to understand what that profile would look like. This is in addition to a risk register that you would create to monitor risk. Now, the risk register is covered in one of the weeks of my 12-week learning lessons if you want to learn how to develop a risk register. Acceptance is what we're going to focus on within that contract management checklist. Now, acceptance can be theoretical until you receive a defective good or a non-conforming service. So I'm speaking from experience, like, oh yeah, I can talk and teach about acceptance all day long, but when you have a defective product or a non-conforming service, all of a sudden it's like, what do we do? What are our rights? What are our obligations? What does the supplier, service provider do? Do we really have to pay for the service to be reconducted? Okay, so then it really becomes clear that the contract requirements are so important. That's why this is part of the Contract Professionals Playbook, because if we don't write good requirements, we can't manage good requirements. And acceptance is one area where I personally feel we, as a team, as a profession, do not write good acceptance criteria, and therefore it is very hard to manage. And that's why lawyers push back and say, hey, we can't terminate for cause for a breach because we don't have good enough requirements to establish what the law would consider a material breach of the agreement. So here are some sample questions from that contract management checklist that's part of the Professionals Playbook. So I'll go through these really quickly rather. Who at the customer is going to verify that the goods are delivered? Who at the customer will verify that the goods meet technical and functional specifications? Who at the customer will verify that the services are delivered on time? Who at the customer will verify that the services meet the technical and functional specifications? Now, guys, this isn't approval. This isn't like, oh yeah, phase 1 is done. It means phase 1 is accepted per the criteria. We are now paying for that work, and we agree that it is in fact conforming. That is what acceptance means. And so these are the kinds of questions that help a person understand what the management obligations are so that that person can administer the contract, monitor the contract, make sure that the relationship is managed, and if there are any defaults in any of the technical delivery, that they can then be corrected quickly through your cure and corrective action plan contract language. Here are some more sample questions from that Playbook contract management plan. Are there inspections? When? At what point? The supplier at the point of shipment or the customer at the time of delivery? Is testing required? Does the good or service require quality assurance audits? Are there additional expenses for inspections or certificates of compliance, and who pays for them? This is a big deal when my customer has to fly out at a specific date and time with a team of people to inspect something, and that something isn't done. That's how this whole contracting management comes into play. What happens when they get on the plane and they're in South Carolina and they determine that the product isn't done, it doesn't meet quality assurance, it's quote unquote defective as it's determined in the contract? Who pays? How does the schedule get impacted, etc.? And then what if something's rejected and needs to be inspected again? So again, I mean, I've got 6 pages of questions under these 6 different subheadings. These are just the sample questions for acceptance. All right, so the Contract Professionals eLearning program can be delivered in 2 ways. If you're interested in registering for the program, getting the tools, getting the videos, getting live Q&A for individuals up to 3 people, you can register. There's a separate price point and a separate way of registering for groups of 4 or more from the same company. Please visit the registration link here at the bottom of the slide. And if you want to learn more, you can email me, jn@jnyden.com, or visit that bit.ly link on the bottom of the slide. Thanks for your time.